Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to another exciting collaboration between the Denver Streets Partnership and Shared Studios as part of the Denver Streets for People Summit. Shared Studios brings together a unique group of global perspectives to have transformative conversations in both immersive and virtual environments. Today, we are so happy to be bringing together an international group of experts from Bolivia, Germany, Sweden, and the US to explore creative ways that we might address urban mobility to help us reimagine how we move through the city. I'm Dr. Brandon Furter, Director of Global Community for Shared Studios, and I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for the Denver Streets for People Summit, the Denver Community Active Living Coalition, a grant-funded program in association with the Denver Department of Transportation and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I'd also like to send out a deep thank you to the Denver Streets Partnership, a coalition of community organizations advocating for people-friendly streets. You can read more about these organizations in your program, and we encourage you to stay active and involved with these amazing groups after the summit, as well as attend additional events during this, what I believe is the last day of this exciting three-day summit. Joining me today in the conversation is Michelle. Is your last name Roche or Roche? I'm going to say it wrong. Michelle?
Oh, sorry. Roche sounds, it's Roche. Roche sounds better, but it's just Roche.
Yes, joining us is Miss Michelle Roche. Michelle has been a Streets for People citizen advocate since 2016, when her 14-year-old son Cole was killed by a speeding drunk driver while standing in a bike lane a block from home. The following year, the city of Denver announced a goal of achieving 0 traffic fatalities by 2030, and Cole's story has been shared widely to illustrate the urgent importance of this work ever since. Now Michelle speaks and helps to organize events that raise awareness for safe streets like this one. Thank you for that, Michelle. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you for correcting me on your name. Should have asked you that earlier, but hindsight is 2020. Before I introduce all of you to our guests, I just want to kind of give you an overview of the format of today's event. We'll engage our guests in a conversation about creative new ways of moving through the city for about 30-35 minutes. And at that time, we'll then open it up to questions from all of the attendees. I do want to say, however, that if something strikes you throughout the conversation, if a question comes to you or if you have a comment, please by all means use the chat function. I'll be monitoring those questions throughout, and once we get to the Q&A session, I'll be pulling those questions to engage our panelists. If you need assistance during the webinar, you can reach out to Emma. She's in the background right now, ensuring that everything goes smoothly at emma@sharedstudios.com. I just got told also that the summit goes through until Saturday, so I want to make sure that everybody attends events tomorrow as well. There are also a lot of exciting events that are happening later on today. But let's meet our guests. We'll begin by introducing you to joining us from Bolivia is Fatima Sanchez. Fatima holds a BA in journalism, social communication, and public relations, and a master's degree in international studies. In international relations. She specializes in cooperative communication and institutional image and worked as a manager of communications for the public enterprise cable car system in Bolivia between 2014 and 2018. She's here to share with us the amazing work that they've done on the cable car system in La Paz. Hola, Fatima, welcome.
Thank you. A pleasure to be with you this day.
Thank you. And joining us to assist with translation is Samuel Ordonez. He is a Mexico City-based translator, and he'll be working with us throughout the event. So welcome, Sam, on the other side of the screen there.
Thank you very much, Bren.
Next, please welcome Andres Schneider. Andres is an expert speaker and consultant in digital mobility. His doctorate thesis on electrical mobility explored innovative mobility business models. He is based in Berlin, Germany, where he runs a digital mobility blog that explores the future of urban mobility and movement. Welcome, Andreas.
Thank you for having me, Brandon.
Next is Daniel Bistrom. Daniel is project manager at ArcDesk, a think tank, Sweden's National Center for Architecture and Design. An industrial designer, his work focuses on strategic design and community-based development. He's currently working on a project called Street Moves that we're hoping to hear a lot more about today. And this project has the goal of demonstrating how careful attention to the scale of the street can enable deeper transformations in cities across Sweden while using a collaborative research and design process. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you.
And finally, from here in the US, we have Eric Iverson. Eric is the City of Tempe Transit Manager in Tempe, Arizona. Over the past 22 years, he has been integral in reshaping the car culture of the Phoenix metro area, dramatically increasing bicycle infrastructure in Tempe, working with Valley Metro to build the Valley's first mass transit rail system, and connecting Tempe communities through a new streetcar system. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks, Brandon.
So thank you all for joining us today. I want to start with kind of a question to just frame our discussion. You know, a lot of what we've been talking about in a number of the panels that we've sponsored throughout the Denver Streets for People Summit has been the response of urban areas to this particular moment. I think we can't really engage the world right now without understanding that we're still in the midst of a global pandemic that's impacting some communities and countries, you know, more aggressively than others as different cities, countries, and municipalities adopt different strategies for engaging the coronavirus pandemic. But I guess one thing that COVID-19 has done is it's forced us to think creatively about a number of things that we've kind of become used to in our daily lives. And I'm wondering, in what ways is this moment, do you think this moment is requiring us to rethink how we move around the city? Is this moment kind of showing us something new about how we might get around urban areas? Daniel, I'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's always good to start. Then others can just tell me what they think about that. But for me, I think this situation with the pandemic, actually, in a way, it opens up, as you say, the experimentation. It is more allowed to experiment in a way that we are looking for new solutions in so many different ways. And in its way also that we are talking to new ears, in that sense, that more people are looking for these new solutions. So, yeah. I mean, in Stockholm and in Sweden, you definitely see a different, you know, pattern on how people are moving around and how you're using the streets and what we need to. We have knew that for quite a while that things are changing, but that has just speeded up quite a lot during this time, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I love your comment about experimentation. And as we go through our talk today, I definitely want to come back and talk to you about the ways that you've been experimenting with the launch of your new project, which happened yesterday. So we're excited to be some of the first to learn about how that was received. Andreas, how about you? How is this moment kind of forcing us to reimagine how we move around the city?
So yeah, I think, I mean, during the crisis, like, of course, the pandemic has hit us all quite hard. And also here in Germany, in Berlin, like, you know, mobility has really gone down in the crisis. I would say, like, in most places and most modes, like 50% and more, like public transport in Berlin, for example, even went down like 90% in terms of travelers and also distances. So I think, like, public transport, of course, like, has been hit hard, especially. And then what we saw in Germany and also in Berlin, like a lot of like more active modes, such as biking and walking, like kind of became very kind of substantial. Like biking has tripled in terms of like usage, and walking, people are like way more walking than before. So there have been a few shifts, but overall, I still think that the overriding trends that were there before the pandemic are also still in place now. When we talk about climate change and we need to like be sustainable, right? When we talk about digitalization, I mean, there has been digitalization before, and now with the video conferencing, with the home office, of course, everything has been accelerated. And I think this is also what we're going to see in the future, which is, if we're talking about like the entire society, in my opinion, rather good thing. Like people will be probably a bit like less mobile in the future. which makes like mobility probably a bit more sustainable. In the end, we need to like mitigate those changes, especially also for public transit companies, because I think they really like going to see like also like a drop in demand in the future, not as significant as now, but like even in the long run. And so of course we have to take care that even those like public transit companies are also like taken care of, that they can still provide their services like also in the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how this moment might decrease movement in a number of ways, while increasing it in different ways, you know, with bicycles. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about, Eric, you live in an area that, you know, I'm guessing today the temperature is probably 110 degrees Fahrenheit or near that. So I'm wondering for you in this moment, you know, when addressing this question about how this moment is forcing us to kind of rethink how we get around the city, what have you seen, given that it's still quite warm outside, and I think that you might be able to tell a place like Denver what they can expect in the winter. So how have things changed there in Tempe?
Yeah, so those are good conversation, good questions. I mean, we see this even with our, you know, we have globally high heat records that we set here in the Phoenix metro area. But even with that, during the summer, we had still a lot of outdoor, we had demand from our community, and we had a lot of usage in our, you know, public spaces like streets, pathways, parks. So even with that, we saw a great demand this summer. We expect, as we are now cooling down, today the high is only supposed to be 105 today. This morning was about 75 degrees. So we're seeing, you know, we anticipate that we'll get even more demand coming into the fall months. I mean, the way we see, you know, what's happening during COVID, during this pandemic, is that we kind of see it as an opportunity in our community in Tempe to reinvent. You know, we're kind of staff and a lot of the community and our councils, like, if we don't look at changing things now, then when? So there's a lot of discussion about, you know, as we've been talking about open streets and kind of providing more and more access for bicycle pedestrian activity. And we have seen an uptick with that. So one of the things I'd mentioned about public transit is we've seen actually only about a 50 to 55% decline in our public transit usage in our metro area, which we think is better than maybe some other areas. So we've been really actively trying to push for bringing people back to public transit, knowing that they, you know, during the lockdown periods that people really left. So we are seeing people, you know, return to transit too during these times.
I think it's interesting, I think, for folks anticipating the winter in Denver to hear that even in that sort of heat, there was still a high demand for people to be in outdoor spaces. I would be interested to see if that transfers to cold spaces in the fall and winter. Fatima, how about you? How has this moment in Bolivia forced people? I know that, you know, you've worked on the cable car system, which is already a reimagining of how we get around a city and how we move around a city. So I'm wondering if this moment has you know, how has it forced folks in Bolivia to kind of rethink about movement in the city?
Claro, las soluciones creativas creo que ya se las empezó a aplicar no solamente en Bolivia, sino en todas partes del mundo. Creo que se empezaron a repensar muchas formas de transporte y de mejora de calidad de vida, pero el tema del COVID de alguna forma ha acelerado todos estos cambios, ¿no? Por ejemplo, lo que en algún momento hablábamos con ustedes, el sistema integrado de transportes, lugares donde puedas llegar no solamente en vehículos o en metros o en buses o en teleféricos, sino también en bicicletas o caminando para seguir una interconexión. Entonces, a partir de este problema o esta crisis que hemos tenido como país, como mundo, creo que las formas alternativas y creativas de movilizarnos dentro de lo que podemos movilizarnos, ¿no? Han generado una aceleración de los cambios. La gente sale poco, trata de ser ordenada, usa más el movimiento a pie o utiliza bicicletas. Y el teleférico ha sido una solución bastante importante dentro de todo esto, porque lo que también conversábamos en algún momento es un sistema limpio, es un sistema ordenado, un sistema donde se puede trabajar de una manera que la bioseguridad está presente. Entonces eso es importante decir que se ha estado trabajando. Yo en este momento lo veo un poco más de afuera porque, como les comentaba, yo estuve trabajando mucho tiempo con el tema de política integral de ciudades, dejando un poco el tema del teleférico. Así que bueno, esa es la visión que ha tenido Bolivia, unos cambios creativos que se han acelerado en relación a todo el proceso que hemos tenido que vivir como país y como mundo.
So basically, all these creative solutions are present worldwide. We are rethinking how are we moving in the public spaces, but at the same time, we are improving the quality of life. What happened with the COVID crisis is that it boosted all this seek for all these solutions. Right now, we have integrated systems in which we can use bikes, buses, cars, and this crisis has given us this alternative, and it had made us be creative in the way that we are moving around the cities. Right now, people are transporting less. They are using less public transportation systems. They are walking more. They are using more the bike. And here is the importance of the cable car, because it is a clean order system that guarantees the biosecurity for all its users. So as I mentioned, I have worked in creating all these kind of policies. I have worked for the cable car, but right now I am focusing more in the mobility policies. And this is part of the Bolivian vision that we have, and that has been boosted by the COVID crisis.
Fatima, you've talked about creativity, and so I'm thinking about the ways in which we creatively move around the city and creatively use public spaces. I'm wondering, Daniel, if you can tell us a little bit about your project and the success of it, how at least how the initial response to the project that you had yesterday.
Yeah, definitely. And when it's funny that you say the success, because we don't know that at all.
Right.
It could be a failure. I don't know. But that is the thing, actually, because we are experimenting quite a lot here. And that is the key. I feel that we just need to try new things, not only doing it in on the screen, but actually do it in real life and try out different ways forward. And what we have done here, we have went together interesting group. It is Volvo M. It's a carpool solution for Volvo. We have Voi, they are offering this e-scooter services. And then we had board of transport in Sweden. We have the city of Stockholm. And then the innovation public national authority for innovation in Sweden. And all of us are then working together. And then we also invite a lot of different, people from different area. It could be from the health area. It could be from the, you could be a gardener being part of this. It could be people in different ages. And I think that is the key, that we cannot only work with a traffic engineer designing the streets, because then when you put in traffic, you will get out traffic. But if you put in a lot of different, kind of competences like that, you get more out. And we need to look into much more functions, because the streets is the biggest, public space we have in Sweden. When we count all the streets we have in Sweden, we have about 40,000 kilometers of streets. That's about, in the surface, it's about 6 times Paris. How are we using that today? How are you utilizing that space today? And especially during this time with the pandemic, we can see quite a big, need of, green areas, for example, parks and so. But why don't we just bring that closer to people, closer to the streets? We can divide the street, and that is actually nothing new. When you look at, old films and pictures of the streets, how it was 100 years ago, it was divided between a lot of different functions. So it is a little bit like a shift that we are in. It has been a shift. There have been shifts before, what we have been doing here, we have been doing this, we call it a mobility hub, or it's kind of like a building block that we can put on top of a street. It's a quick way of transforming a street, just to try out how it could be like. And then it could be like a motor for like encouraging you know, a more long-term change of the streets. But it's a way to try different solutions. So I made kind of a, yeah, I have some.
Yeah, could we see, can we bring up a photograph of the hub?
So
Daniel, I know you said that you were just starting one of those new initiatives just yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely new. And I mean, we have worked quite, I started to work with this spring, this April. And we have just, it's a very quick process. And now the design process that we are working at, it is continuing out on the street. We are continuing to, you know, design these solutions out on the streets and then evaluate. I don't know if you see anything now. I don't see anything, but
yeah, Emma, Nick, are we able to pull up a photograph to show our attendees?
Well,
no?
But I will just continue to explain a bit more. It will just make you even more curious when you don't see it. But it is kind of like, what we have done is it's a platform, and we have actually got quite a lot of inspiration from different places in the world. We have, for example, taken inspiration from parklet solutions. We actually, you know, renting, yeah, here we are.
There we go.
Yeah, so, and we want to do this in a way that is just, it should not only be like some, I mean, a parklet is where you, of course, where you rent a parking lot and you can do whatever you want on that parking lot, except that, you know, instead of just parking a car there. What we have in Sweden, as many other cities around the world, is we have the e-scooters, and there is also like challenges with this. They are like parked everywhere. So that is one of the incentives with this, around micro mobility. But we don't only want to make like parking, you know, places for these e-scooters and other vehicles, but it's also like combining different, you know, functions that we want to have in the street. We want the social, you know, places for more social interactions. It was so great today, because this is from yesterday. That is one of the places. Then today we were putting out on another street, and immediately it was this old lady that came there and said like, oh, this is so great. I can sit here in the morning and drink my coffee. And that was so cute. And she was also, I can sit here with my husband. And then in the other, you know, 1 hour later, it was a lot of kids just climbing on these, like using it in unexpected ways. But what you see here is kind of like, it's a platform. It's nothing, it's not a rocket science like that, but it's made in a way that is very simple to put it out. You can do it, it is, yeah, you can do this in quite a, you know, fast, very quick solution. And on top of it, you can, you know, create so many different things. Now you see these applications, but it could be, you know, you could have a playground, it could be outdoor gyms, it could be just plants, and you know, you could grow your own food here. It could be so many different things, and that is exactly what we are looking for now. Like, what could we use? What do we want to? What kind of functions do we want to have on our streets? Except,
what material are these hubs made of?
So this is actually glulam, and we are also looking into glulam and cross-laminated timber. You know, in Sweden, as we have quite a lot of forests, and we are good in using timber, and we are using that much more and more in also in big constructions, in buildings and so on. This is actually made for, you know, yeah, it will, what do you say, the duration of it, it will be able to be out in all kinds of weather, we think. we will see how it will act, because this is also a try. We will just try this, but it is it's much more sustainable material than many other, than concrete and metal and other things. So that is also why we want to, and it's also it's easier to adapt to different, because streets are always different. I mean, as you see here, this street is very, even if you say it is a straight street, it's never straight. It's also bumps and things like that.
Daniel, I love how you were describing the infrastructure, but also the impact that it's having on people's lives. I think we're all hearing so much about social isolation in the time of COVID and the impact on people's mental health there. And since so many people are working from home now, getting out less, I know I particularly think about often and worry about populations like seniors or people with mobility limitations, or people who just can't afford to own a car. How are you or any of you seeing some of the creative innovations that you're bringing to your cities impacting those populations? You mentioned, Daniel, that you are seeing some seniors like enjoying having their coffee on the bench.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I wanted to let someone else say something, but for me, it is like, I definitely, I mean, as a designer as I am, you always have these tentacles out there. You're looking to the needs of the users, and that is exactly what we want to do here. And that is also something that we still are, like, now when we get out on the streets, we will invite all of these user groups and see how they can, what needs do they have, and how can we improve this concept to their needs. And it's definitely so that, I mean, the population in Sweden, as in many other countries, we are getting older, and I mean, we also need to have that in mind. We need to, work with all different kind of people. We want to work with, I mean, design is a tool we don't need to point out all the problems, because I think we all know the problems around pollution and cars and stuff like that. That is not our aim. We don't need to do that. We want to look into solutions. We want to try new things and then see what happens.
I mean, if I may add this, so in Berlin, like the city of Berlin has created this, like they call it pop-up bike lanes. So like kind of converting like traditional car lanes into like bike lanes exclusively for bikes, and also like the kick scooters that we just saw in Daniel's presentation. And it really feels good to have all this space, because usually you're competing in the car lane in many cases with like the bikes and cars are like kind of competing, and the bikers, of course, are like the weaker part in the equation, right? So like having this whole lane, like for the scooter or the bike for yourself, I think this is quite a creative solution. And I think it like is a lot of like increases convenience for the bikers and also for the kick scooter people.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to touch on with you, Andreas, is in a previous conversation you and I had, you mentioned the need for working with multiple types of transportation. And I think that this is also true for you, Fatima. You mentioned that there are, 9 cable car systems, but they're integrated with bicycles and with other forms of transportation. I wonder first if, Andreas, you could talk a little bit about the need to integrate these various systems to create, a better sense of movement through the city and provide different people with different options. And then I'll come to you, Fatima, to talk a little bit about how you've integrated the cable car system into these other modes.
Yeah, I think that's really a great topic, because I think it's kind of the overriding kind of picture we will see. And I think we will see, and we also need to see kind of this shift from an like paradigm shift from an old world, which has primarily been like car dominated and if not even car dependent, right? And very much also like focusing on products that have been like developed and introduced and sold, produced, everything like by car manufacturers, like many different products. So it's like a product focused world. But of course we know that this type of like world has a lot of like challenges and problems, like talking about carbon dioxide emissions, right? Talking about noise emissions and traffic accidents. We've touched that topic before. So Germany we have around about 3,000 deaths in traffic every year, and becoming even from 20,000 in the 70s. So it has already improved, but I still think 3,000 is definitely still significant. So that's also like a thing we need to consider. And we have like here people on the panel for, and we can see that it's a really, really important thing. And at the same time, limited public urban space. So I think this old world, we have to move to this like new mobility paradigm, which is pretty much like considering mobility more as a service. So the like essential question is in the end, how do I get from A to B, right? And then in this multimodal world, this will be a combination, or can be a combination even of different modes of transportation, right? So I can start my journey in the morning, like taking my bike and going to the train station. Then I board this train that brings me to the city center. I get off the train, and then I'll hire one of the kick scooters that Daniel might be able to provide. And so I'm kind of combining those modes of transportation. And in the end, it's a very individual thing. And I think that's really important. So public transport and transit doesn't mean it's like only public, it's also individual, because in future, hopefully, and everything will be digitally enabled, you can still choose based on your preference, right? For every individual, it might be a different decision based on time, travel time, on cost or convenience. And so for person A, it's important to travel as fast as possible. For the next one, he's a student, right? He might want to travel like just as cheap as possible. And so everyone can still choose based on his or her preferences. And this is, I think, important. And then in the end, hopefully, we're going to have this kind of sustainable mobility, which is like less carbon dioxide emissions, hopefully, integrated. So like holistically considering not only car rides, but holistically, how do I get from A to B? Shared hopefully as well, because you know in Germany cars usually like stand still for 23 hours a day, so 95% of the day the cars are not being used in Germany. So this is not very efficient. So obviously the car sharing approach does make some sense, because you kind of share efficiently like kind of scarce resources, and especially in the limited public space. And yeah, and then digitally supported, we're using these apps in the future, so everything can be organized efficiently. And this is like how I see the future. At the same time, I'm not the one telling there will be no more cars, right? I still think there are still use cases for cars in the future. People with kids, people who want to like have cargo to bring from A to B. So we need to be realistic, so and integrate these cars still in our kind of urban mobility. And I think this is like possible. We already started like electrification, right? Electric vehicle, but it's probably not like the final solution. So there might be hydrogen, like a fuel cell vehicles as well. And I advocate to be also like technology open. So like, I'm not an engineer, not even the most skilled engineer in the world will be able to like forecast technology and predict technology exactly. So we need to be open for new technology coming up. And that's how we kind of also then integrate the car without like having too much evil in the world.
Yeah, I love that idea of being technology open. And I mean, I think that this moment in general has taught us to remain flexible and be open to all sorts of new solutions. I want to, Fatima, I'm going to turn to you. And then after that, I'm going to go ahead and start addressing some of the questions that we have in the chat. But Fatima, I wanted to hear from you a little bit about how you've integrated the cable car into these other forms of mobility. And I think one thing that's really interesting about the cable car is that you weren't able to build a subway. So you were forced to come up with a creative solution. And I'm interested in hearing more about kind of how these certain moments force us to think outside of the box and come up with new solutions. And while Fatima is answering, if we could get a picture of the cable car for our attendees, that would be great.
Bueno, contestando un poco las tres interrogantes que me planteas, Brando. Primero, y para ser muy breve con el tema de por qué un teleférico y no un subterráneo, por ejemplo, en las ciudades de La Paz y el Alto. La ciudad de La Paz está construida sobre ríos. Es imposible poder hacer un subway en La Paz. Y bueno, el Alto es una ciudad hermana, ¿no? que está a muy pocos kilómetros de distancia, entonces el transporte interdepartamental es muy importante. Se consideraron estas otras funciones más de transporte masivo para la ciudad de La Paz, pero al tener una concentración muy grande de población, es muy complicado también hacer intervenciones físicas en los lugares y se consideró el tema de la acupuntura urbana. Es decir, que las torres son afectaciones muy pequeñas en relación a lo que vendría a ser toda una estación de metro o colocar rieles. Entonces se pensó en un teleférico urbano que en ese momento son 10 líneas que trabajan dando a los barrios de las ciudades de La Paz y el Alto entre sí y forman todo un anillo integrador. Pero el proyecto no nace solamente como una solución única del transporte urbano, nace como el sistema integrado de transporte. ¿A qué me refiero? A que el teleférico, si bien conecta, pero tiene tres fases. La parte de la integración física, bahías bastante grandes donde se puede llegar en otros sistemas integrados o puedes llegar a pie, luego una integración operacional y luego posteriormente una integración física. En este momento hay ya una primera fase hecha con las bahías construidas, pero también ya se está empezando a trabajar con la integración operacional, porque hay varios buses de transporte urbano de los municipios que llegan a las bahías. Entonces, de alguna forma, es todo una red de integración metropolitana a la cual hemos estado apuntando, donde llegan estos transportes y puedes llegar también de manera particular. Antes el boliviano, el paceño en particular, y es algo muy cultural, salimos y tratamos de tomar una movilidad de nuestra puerta. Con el tema del teleférico como que hubo un cambio también de mentalidad, de poder caminar unos metros más y poder llegar a una estación del teleférico para tomar un sistema de transporte. Entonces hay este modo de pensar y esta cultura también de transporte y de movilidad que se han estado trabajando. Es importante recalcar que en todo momento la calidad de servicio y la calidad de vida han sido unas formas muy importantes de trabajo para la concepción misma del teléfono. Y pese a que hemos sido el primero, hemos sido pioneros en desarrollar un sistema de transporte masivo en Bolivia, la gente lo ha aceptado con mucho entusiasmo y en pocos meses hemos podido ver cómo el teleférico ha empezado a formar parte de la vida de las personas. Me gustaría, después de que Sam nos pueda traducir todo esto, hablar un poco de lo que ha sido la Gerencia de Servicio al Usuario y Cultura Teleférico, que ha trabajado con la visión de que las bahías y el teleférico no solo sean estaciones de tránsito para que la gente pueda ser transportada, sino en lugares de encuentro y de cultura y de arte y de educación.
Sam?
Hello, everyone. So basically, La Paz is a city that has been built over rivers. So basically, having a subway was impossible. El Alto is a twin city. So we have a transportation system between both cities. The other options that we had were really invasive with all the situation that you can see in the picture. It would have been really invasive. So we created this concept of urban acupuncture, which is less invasive. In that case, we decided that the cable cars were going to be less invasive than any other transportation system. Right now, we have 10 operating lines connecting both cities, and this is a unique solution. Then we came up with the idea of creating an integrated system in which we would have physical integration through bus stops and also the operations integrations. So right now we're working on integrating these operations to create a metropolitan system, but also we are changing the mindset of the Bolivian people, because the Bolivian people used to think like, I'm just going out of my house and there should be a bus waiting for me. But no, now they are walking towards the cable car stations, and that is reshaping the mindset of the people. Also, I want to mention that we have thought all the system with quality as a central piece of all these services, because it can increase the quality system itself and also the life quality of the people that lives around it. We have been pioneers in Bolivia in creating these integrated systems. People are really, really happy. And I would like also to mention, after Sam finishes with this intervention, how are we creating culture and education in the places where people arrives in these stops for the buses and to get to the cable car. We are not only using this as a way to connect people and just as a transportation system, but also to bring culture and education closer to them.
I think that's such a good point, Fatima. Is that it's you know, Andreas, you were talking about it's all about different ways of for people to get from A to B, but I think Fatima really adds on to that. That in getting from A to B, we can create hubs where we can engage people in culture and all of the things that are special about our cities. I want to get to some of the questions. I want to make sure we have time for the questions that are coming in on the chat. And we have one from Lisa for you, Eric. Tempe and the metro area have streets comprised of 2 to 3 lanes in each direction with 45-mile-an-hour speed limits. Has it been challenging shifting the norms to encourage more transit and active transportation modes in a city used to driving everywhere? Is this structure changing to meet the needs of all road users?
A great question. The short answer is yes. We can. I think even in a region that has been so historically developed around the car, you can shift it. I mean, the expression, if you build it, they will come, has applied well to us. It's really been about a 20-25 year process in this region to start looking at how we build a city that has mobility options for everyone. And the investments, the community has really, you know, we've repeatedly voted for funding public transit, funding bicycle pedestrian programs. Our city in particular, I think because we're a college town, a little bit more progressive, I think we've had an advantage of even being more ambitious and aggressive with funding that kind of infrastructure. The benefit of having wide streets and really fast streets that we all inherited when we embarked upon this transformative process is that you have a lot of space to work with. Streets are public spaces. So, you know, that's what this whole dialogue is about today is, you know, how do you culturally look at or changing the culture to look at streets as spaces for people, for everyone, not just car travel. And it's, in some cases, it's an easier battle to say, okay, you have a 6-lane or a 7-lane or an 8-lane arterial street, which is amazing because that's like the size of freeways. And you take away 1 lane or 2 lanes and you show people that you can add trees, you can add public art, you can add public transit, bike lanes, wider sidewalks. People, we've seen, at least in our city, we've seen that people accept that and they see that that's a benefit to their lives. That's an improvement in quality of life. And it's not a huge impact to car travel. So, you know, sort of like Bolivia, you guys have had a challenge. I think you did the cable car because you can't do subways. We because of cost, we're not building a subway. We're not building an elevated transit system. We're putting rail, we're putting transit and bicycle facilities in our streets that were previously just for cars. So we're utilizing those really wide streets that had really high speed limits and recharacterizing them by adding rail. So for example, our streetcar project, our regional light rail project is something that we took streets that were 6 and 7 lanes wide. We took out 2, sometimes 3 lanes of traffic, put in rail, added bike lanes, put in on-street parking, added parklets. And those streets have become, those corridors where we put in those rail projects have, in the last, our rail program really started about 12 years ago in 2008. We've seen that those are the areas where there's more development, there's higher density. That's where we're having our transit-oriented development. And so and it's also where we have our highest ridership of public transit. So we think that those wider streets are really an opportunity and give us a lot of space to work with to make those transformative changes that affect the culture. So I think it's been successful, and we look at those wide streets, those fast streets, as an opportunity.
I love how so many of you are talking about how to make different modes of transportation inviting to more people. And aesthetics do play a part of that, right? I mean, just making a space that is inviting and welcoming and colorful. Fatima, I know earlier in the week when we were preparing, you were talking about some of the high-end graffiti that helps draw attention to the cable cars. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Of course, and I send the pictures about that and others activities that it means Culturas Teleférico. En realidad, Cultura Teleférico nace muy de la mano de lo que ha sido la educación dentro de lo que era el servicio del teleférico. Porque como les comentaba, el teleférico viene a ser el primer sistema de transporte urbano masivo en Bolivia. Entonces teníamos un reto tan grande desde enseñar a manejar cómo la gente entraba al teleférico de la manera ordenada, a subirse a una cabina, porque las cabinas están en movimiento, las cabinas no es que paran para que la gente suba. Entonces había muchos retos a nivel de cómo usar el sistema de transporte. Pero ese reto se lo venció muy rápidamente. La gente realmente se adaptó con mucha facilidad a poder adaptarse, a poder transportarse en teleférico. Y vimos el gran potencial de poder transformar a estas estaciones, porque si bien son 10 líneas, hay muchas estaciones dentro de las líneas, son alrededor de 72 si no me equivoco, y estas estaciones han empezado a albergar a artistas, a niños, a personas de la tercera edad, a deportistas, y hemos empezado a generar todo un movimiento cultural a través de Cultura Teleférico. Tenemos en este momento programas para niños y todos de alguna forma tienen como sponsors, en realidad vienen a invertir porque obviamente la empresa su giro comercial no es la cultura. Entonces hay entidades como UNICEF, como el BID, que trabaja con los murales y grafitis, UNICEF con los niños, que han empezado a trabajar conjuntamente dentro de los programas. Murales y graffiti, por ejemplo, y me gustaría mucho que puedan compartir con nosotros lo que traje de las fotografías. Son concursos de personas y movimientos como los de Colombia o de Brasil que hacen intercambio de este arte y se empiezan a pintar las estaciones y las estaciones quedan maravillosamente llenas de colores. Aventúrate, que aparte de trabajar con todo la visita del teleférico para los niños, trabaja en valores, ¿no? Temas de género, temas de cultura, trabajan deporte, que hemos estado trabajando con los skaters, entonces, o los festivales de música que se han generado en La Paz y en el Alto. Entonces, nuestras estaciones se vuelven centros de encuentro, ya no de tránsito de la gente. Y esto ha generado un tremendo sentimiento de apropiación para la gente. Y es impresionante también ver el orgullo que la gente tiene por tener en Bolivia el teleférico más largo del mundo, el más alto del mundo y todo esto. Entonces son sentimientos para los bolivianos muy fuertes de identidad.
So yes, well, one of the programs that we have at the cable car system is Cultura Teleférico, in which we center the education around the service that we're providing. You must remember that in Bolivia, this is the first massive transportation system. And one of the biggest challenges that we faced was the use, how people were going to get familiar with something so new for them. Also the order, like how would people get to know how to use the system? You know, like these cars are always on the move. They don't really stop so people can just hop on. But these challenges were really fast overcome by people because they adapted themselves and they adopted all this. And this gave us a huge potential because I mentioned that we have 10 lines, but I didn't mention that we have around 22 cable car stops. So we have all these spaces in which artists, sports people, elders can just come and join us. And it has created a massive cultural movement around it. For example, we have some children programming in which we have some sponsors because certainly we are a transportation company. We don't have resources for these programs, but we have had sponsors such as UNICEF and the IDB that are working on these programs. We also have an art exchange programs with murals and graffiti. If you can show the pictures. We have these murals and graffiti artists that are making exchange between Bolivian artists and Colombian artists and Brazilian artists that had given so much color to our hubs and our stations. You wouldn't believe how much people love this. Also, we have other programs such as Aventurate, in which we talk about gender equality. We bring sports to the people as well as several cultural options, as well as music, and so this has reshaped the concept of our hubs. We have become from only a bus stop or a cable car stop, we have become encounter places in which people come and they are happy to be around us and they feel proud. They are really proud that in Bolivia we have the longest cable car in the world system and also the highest cable car system in the world.
This is incredible and leads to another question from one of our attendees that I think if all of you could briefly answer, we're running out of time, but I want to get to this because I think we're talking a lot about how if you build it, they will come, that we can create spaces for culture and for people to come together around mobility and around movement. But we say that with only a minor touch on the obstacles that we face in order to get there. And so from Carol, one of our attendees, they say, what obstacles do we need to be prepared to address when making shifts to create solutions?
Well, nosotros hemos trabajado desde el principio buscando estas soluciones y esas alternativas. Como en un principio dije, de pronto de manera muy creativa, pero este repensar ha sido muchísimo más acelerado a raíz del COVID, ¿no? Ustedes saben perfectamente que nosotros el anterior año hemos tenido problemas muy serios a niveles políticos y se han llegado a quemar buses, por ejemplo, de transporte masivo. Sin embargo, las estaciones del teleférico no han sido afectadas. Es decir, que realmente la gente valora su sistema de transporte por cable. Y hemos ido un poquito más allá, ¿no? Este sentimiento de apropiación y todo han empezado a pedir otros departamentos de Bolivia. En este momento ya hay un teleférico sí turístico en la ciudad de Oruro, en el departamento de Oruro. Y hay otros proyectos también en otros departamentos. Pero me quisiera enfocar un poco en el tema de que hablas de cómo hemos aportado en las soluciones. El tema de la movilidad y el tema de pensar en ciudades mucho más amigables, más seguras, tiene que ver mucho con qué puedes tú también proponerle a la ciudad para que tengan estos espacios y estas oportunidades. Y de alguna forma estas bahías que hablábamos desde un principio les ha dado a las personas estas oportunidades, tanto a los jóvenes de encuentro y de explotar sus capacidades creativas, oportunidades para los niños de repensar su formación y su mirada hacia el mundo, a las personas de la tercera edad de encontrarse con sus grupos pares y poder compartir tiempos, a los deportistas de tener espacios donde realmente sean gratuitos y ellos puedan desarrollar sus deportes. En fin, creo que eso como ciudad, como país, es interesante poderlo replicar y mostrar hacia afuera. Las estaciones, aparte, como hablábamos desde un principio, no solamente se llega con movilidad, sino también hemos creado, y yo veía las fotos de Eric y de Daniel, que hay bahías pequeñas bahías para ciclovías o para los monopatines. Entonces, en el teleférico también existen estas formas de poder llegar. Se han creado programas específicos, por ejemplo, por el momento, los domingos, que la gente puede llegar al teleférico en sus bicicletas. Las bicicletas tienen, no pagan y pueden subir a las cabinas y pueden irse hacia la Ciudad del Alto y seguir con sus rutas. Entonces, se han creado rutas como de ciclovías, pero con conexiones del teleférico. Ese es un bonito ejemplo.
Well, this is a great question because, you know, like since the beginning that we shaped this idea of using the cable car, we have always had these the people at the center. Certainly, the COVID crisis has increased the speed at which we have implemented all these changes. And as you know, last year we have some political struggle here in Bolivia in which some buses were vandalized. But something that is really important to mention is that the cable car hubs were not touched. They were left untouched, which means that people are really respectful of this transportation system. Also, we have implemented this kind of system in the city of Ururu. But the thing is that I want to focus in the solutions. I have mentioned that in the cities, we need to think in safer, friendly ways to coexist, you know? So the big question is not what can we do in the city, but what can we do for our cities? And in that way, these hubs that we have, they have created this opportunity in which we have young people showing their art, kids coming and to have a new vision of what the world should be like, elders having an encountering spaces, as well as sports people having the spaces to develop themselves, you know? And this is something that as the city and as a country, we need to show to the world that it is possible. You know, I was watching the examples from Daniel and Eric in the hubs in which they integrate their scooters. We also have done something similar. For example, on Sundays, people can get with their bikes to the cable car and they can ride the cable car with their bikes. You know, they can come into the cabins and there are some routes, specific routes that they can follow with the bikes, you know. So this is it about how can we improve our cities and how can we focus on the solutions more than in the problems.
Eric, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, so I'm definitely familiar with opposition to our projects. And the thing that I've found in 20 plus years is, you know, people are afraid of change. But, you know, make friends with them and find common ground. People like trees. People like good, attractive public spaces. People like fun. People like freedom. And if you're building a transportation system that has options that your grandma can take or your child can take that might relieve you from having responsibility to transport them, people like that. We've also found that multimodal streets and building a transportation system that has mobility options for everyone, that's where we see our greatest financial investment. People like money. And we, you know, the development that's occurring in our region is centered around our multimodal and rail streets. So we see less investment now in the last 15 years along our freeway corridors and more investments now on our multimodal corridors. So you know, I think you can find common ground with your opposition to show that this can improve to a quality of life. It can improve your freedom, can improve your wallet. So that's what I do to try and find common ground with folks that might be opposed to projects to try and move the needle forward and get those projects done.
I apologize, Andreas and Daniel, we are out of time and I just want to take a minute here and thank you all for joining us at very different hours of the day around the world, coming at us in different languages. It's been a beautiful discussion and I just wanted to pull a couple of key items from the conversation. Andreas, you said something that I think really resonates, which is moving from product focused to people focused. And embracing and being open with technology. And I just want to end actually on something that one of our attendees said, because I think it so beautifully sums up not only this particular session, but a lot of the sessions that have been happening at the summit over the last couple of days. And this is from Carol. She says, "This is a time for creativity. Opportunities abound. As an educator, I said this in March, and it has proven to be true. If people direct and demand change." The panelists this week are sharing that reality. We can't go back to the norm. And I think that if we want to create, streets for the people, if we want to create public spaces for the people have to be part of that solution. And I think through the 3 panels that I've been able to moderate over the course of this summit, I think that what Carol says here is incredibly true and right on. I want to thank all of the attendees for joining us today. And thank you, panelists, again, for being a part of this conversation. And thank you, everybody who's been a part of the Denver Streets for People Summit. I encourage you to continue to attend events that are happening the rest of today and tomorrow. Michelle, I don't know if you know some specific events you want to encourage folks to go to, or anything else you'd like to add.
There are a couple of more interesting things happening today, which are available for view on the agenda, but one that I'm looking forward to is tomorrow afternoon, summing up the summit. There will be some very short presentations from people all over the community, kind of talking about what inspires them. So look for that towards the end of the day on Saturday.
Excellent. Thank you again, panelists. Thank you, attendees. Have a wonderful day ahead of you. And thank you for joining us.
Bye.